Hey guys, I'm Mary and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing my October wrap-up. So in October I read 19 total books, which is quite a few. So hopefully this wrap-up video does not end up being super duper long. We'll try to keep it concise. We'll see how that goes. But so 19 books, I had an average rating of a 3.89, which is pretty standard. And then as far as genres, I read 1 just contemporary fiction, 2 horror, 2 mystery thriller, and then 7 romance and 7 fantasy. So just to get started, and I will be talking about these as usual from my least liked to most liked. So starting off, I did not have any DNFs this month, which is great. I finished everything I started this month. And so starting off first with just my 2-star books, and the first one is Just Like Magic by Sarah Hogle. So this one was a bummer because I really liked Sarah Hogle's first 2 books, so I was really excited for this one. I requested an ARC for this one, just assuming I would love it, and obviously I did not. This is a Christmas romance about Betty, who is this spoiled rich girl who ended up getting cut off from her family, and she's like trying to keep up with the facade on like her social media and to her family that everything's fine, she's doing fine, she's not struggling right now, but she's totally struggling for money, mentally, you know, she's kind of lonely, all kind of the whole kit and caboodle there. And then she ends up accidentally summoning a Christmas spirit named Hal, who is there to help her, and so she ends to help her kind of regain her Christmas spirit. He also can grant wishes, so she's trying to use him to like grant wishes to summon things to give to her family as Christmas gifts idea kind of thing. And then also along the way they end up falling in love. So this one I just did not like. It was because it was so chaotic. This was like one of the most chaotic books I've ever read, and not in a good way. I almost DNF'd it like in chapter 2 just because the both chaos meter and the cringe factor were both entirely too much. I decided to keep going because it was an arc. I wanted to give it more of a shot before DNFing, since I did, you know, request it and got approved to give a review. And so I did push forward, and I figured it was romance, so it would read pretty quickly, but it didn't, as you can tell by the rating, it did not turn around for me. I will say, I think the chaos factor did decrease with time. It did not stay quite as chaotic as it did in those first chapter or 2. I don't think I would have finished it if it had, and same with the cringe factor. It still stayed kind of cringy, but it got less cringy as the book went on. And I think part of the problem was, so the main character is this kind of prissy, spoiled rich girl, and writing that kind of character in a romance where you really want to be and need to be rooting for the character and having them be that and still be redeemable is really hard to pull off. It's possible. See, It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey, but it's a hard line to walk, and Sarah Hogle just didn't pull it off, I think, in this book. And so her kind of behavior and actions at the beginning were just so over the top and cringy. And the way she was, just her behavior really turned me off from her pretty immediately. And she does have a character growth arc during the book, but it took so long for me to just buy back into her character that I didn't have time to then also start wanting to root for her romance, because the whole book, I think, was just me turning my opinion around on her as just a person. So that definitely didn't help. And then as well as our hero Hal, I liked him a lot better as a character, but I really struggled seeing him as a romantic lead. He kind of had this childlike innocence about him, and in a similar way it reminded me a lot of Buddy from the movie Elf, and I just cannot see that personality as a romantic lead. Like, part of reading romance, especially with the male lead, is like I want to fall a little bit for them too, like, and I just could not take him seriously as a romantic lead, but I did like his character. And so then, leading to kind of the main feeling of the book, obviously was the romance, partially for reasons mentioned above. I couldn't see Hal as the romantic lead, but even beyond that, I think there just wasn't enough page time in this book centered around their romance. The book itself seemed to be a lot more centered around the story of the family, this whole family rediscovering the Christmas spirit, and not focused around the romance. And so even with my already hangups on it, it just didn't have enough page time to the romance anyways, because I think maybe if it did, I could have moved past my kind of hangups on how being a romantic lead, etc., but it just didn't. And there was like if you remove like the 3 scenes in which they kissed, you would still have a complete book about this family at Christmas. And so yeah, although definitely disappointment. After the first 2 books that I really love by her, I would definitely still read her after this, and hopefully this is just, you know, a blip on her books for me and not a sign of more to come for how I like her future books. Next, my other 2-star for the month was Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. Unfortunately, this one I've been hearing so many good things about from so many people. I don't think I've heard anyone have a negative opinion. Like, I'm sure people have, but people I've been watching have all loved it, and so I'm pretty sad it didn't work for me. This is a retelling or story inspired by the Three Brides of Dracula. I don't know if it's really a retelling because I've not read Dracula, so I'm not really familiar with what you hear about them from the original, but it is a story about the Three Brides of Dracula, and it is told in this kind of second-person narrative letter style where the main bride, Constanta, is like talking to Dracula about all the things she did, and like it's kind of like, you're wondering how we got to this point of hating you kind of vibe, and telling him like the story from her eyes kind of thing. And so that's the thing I liked about it. I think telling it from this kind of second-person letter was something interesting, and I liked kind of the author went for it with that, and I was intrigued by that, but the rest of this book just didn't click with me. First, I found the plot kind of boring, and I am usually a plot reader first, but I can like books if they don't have a super driving plot, if I like the other parts of it, and I just didn't like the other parts either, so like, beyond the boring plot, I just didn't really care about the characters and the relationships with each other. I didn't particularly find them interesting or compelling. I wasn't really interested to read more. By the time we were introduced to the third bride, I was just kind of like bored enough that I just had no emotional investment in the third relationship. And then as well, the world building, it gave vibes, it gave good vibes, the kind of the gothic-y, vampire-y vibes, but this also was supposedly set across multiple locations, across lots of years, and it just never felt like they ever did that. Like they talked about how they moved to a new country, but like if you looked at the house they were staying in, it all just felt the same. So like you could have told me they had stayed in the same house the entire time and I would have believed you. So unfortunately, just did not work for me. Okay, moving on to my 3-star reads. The first was Servant Mage by Kate Elliott. This is a fantasy novella following Felian, who is a lamplighter, which means she has kind of magic related to like light and fire kind of deal, and she is in indentured servitude, and she ends up freed from the servitude by a rebel group, and it's kind of her adventures with them and kind of how she fits into their cause. And this one, if it had just been the first third and the last third of the book, would have been great. I really loved this at the beginning. I thought it was going to be a 5-star. I thought the world was interesting. I liked the kind of the lamplighter magic as well as the other magic we started to see. I liked the characters, but after about a third, the plot just took this detour that I wasn't necessarily interested in, and when it took it, I was like, okay, this isn't really where I thought we were gonna go, but like, we'll see what happens here. And then it just felt like the author smushed so many ideas into that 50 pages of like the middle third of this novella that it just didn't work. Like, it was kind of confusing. Like, I found I kept rereading paragraphs trying to just figure out what was happening before I even had an opinion on what was happening. And so that just didn't work. And then we brought it back around at the end. She brought it back around in the last third. And so I really just wish it was the first and last third, because it would have been great. I would be interested to read more books in this world. I have no idea if she's ever planning on writing in this world again. But I would definitely be interested in reading more books in this world, especially if they were full-length novels, because I like so much of the setup and the world building and stuff. It was just, there's too much in that middle third for a novella, and it just didn't work at all. Next 3-star was The Hollow Places by T. Kingfisher. This is a horror novel that is set in a little kind of roadside oddities museum in North Carolina. Our main character, Kara, her uncle owns a museum, and she is freshly divorced and ends up moving back into the uncle's spare room because she's, leaving her home after her husband divorces her. And so when she gets there, she helps out and helps run the museum, and she ends up discovering this portal in one of the walls to like this other world. And so I really liked the writing in this. I thought the kind of humor that T. Kingfisher weaved in with it was good. I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I also love the Wonder Museum setting. I've seen those kinds of roadside oddity museums a lot, kind of just growing up and going on road trips around the southeastern US and just seeing those. And so I thought they were so fun. That was so fun. But I found the plot, especially once we got into kind of the portal to the other world, to be just kind of boring. And I do think some of that has to do with the narrator. I listened to this on audio, and the narrator, the way she read it, she just lacked any kind of tension in her voice. So it was like she didn't convey any kind of emotions of attention or anything like that during kind of all the horror parts of it. And so I just didn't feel like any of the horror feelings. Like, I didn't feel the tension about what was happening. I didn't feel creeped out or scared or any of that. It was just kind of like meh. But yeah, I mean, I liked the characters too. So like, I liked all of the non-horror parts of this. I just didn't like the portal horror part. So I don't know. It was just fine. Next, I have one 3.5 star, and that is Amari and the Great Game by B.B. Alston. This is the second book in the Amari series following Amari. In the first book, she is looking for her missing brother and ends up discovering kind of this secret hidden magic world that he was involved with. And it's kind of like a Men in Black style magic world where there's lots of different magical creatures that are kind of hiding themselves within the real world, very like Men in Black and the Aliens. And I really love that first book, but this one just didn't work as well for me. I did not find it nearly as engaging to read. I still really liked the world and kind of the Men in Black style world. I really liked all the characters in this one, but the plot just wasn't paced well. Like, I got halfway through the book and it felt like there was like pretty much no movement on the main kind of question, the main plot answering this question of like, how did this thing happen? And so like there was just no movement, so I just like wasn't compelled to pick it up to like find out how they're going to resolve it, because it just didn't feel like they were going to. And then as well, it's called Amari and the Great Game, and the Great Game was kind of a secondary plot, and I just wish it had been its own, like I wish they'd had the two plots and had their own books to focus on, because I feel like we didn't really make much progress on the first plot, but we didn't spend a whole lot of time focusing on the Great Game either, and I think that was also kind of a missed opportunity. But, so yeah, the plot, for a lot of it, it just dragged, and then the end, kind of a lot happened all at once, just like boom, boom, boom. So yeah, unfortunately, just not as good as the first one to me, even though it did still have elements from the first one that I enjoyed a lot. Next, I read All the Horses of Iceland by Sarah Tolmie. This is a historical fantasy telling the story of this merchant from Iceland who ends up joining these merchant groups all over kind of Central Asia, and kind of his journeys, as well as discovering kind of this kind of magical horse lore. And I enjoyed this. I don't really have a lot to say about this one. Honestly, I read this right at the beginning of the month, and a lot of the details just aren't in my brain, as well as other things that I read an equally long amount of time ago. So it didn't stick very well, but it was a good kind of story if you're looking for like just kind of a short little like around the campfire folk tale kind of story. And I liked the historical aspect of it, kind of weaving in with some of the magic. So yeah, I enjoyed that part of it, but yeah, don't remember a ton of the plot details actually. So it was a 4-star at the time, but definitely not a 4-star that stuck with me, evidently. Next, I read The Rogue Not Taken by Sarah MacLean, and this follows Sophie Talbot, who at the very beginning of the book, she's at this party with this society party, and she ends up pushing her brother-in-law, a duke, into a fountain because she's sticking up for her sister, and because the duke had a mistress, and so she's sticking up for her sister and does that, and then in response, she flees kind of the countryside in a carriage that ends up having another duke in it, and so they end up kind of in this carriage ride together. And so this, I really like the kind of road trip plot setup of historical romances, and I think this one did it really well. I really liked Eversley, the duke, in the carriage, and Sophie. I thought they worked really well together. I did find the middle of this book kind of dragged a little bit. We had a point about the halfway where I was like, okay, we've really built up kind of the relationship kind of all the way at this point, and there's not really any other plot or conflicts that are happening that to like be focused on, but they're not together yet either. So I'm like, at this point, not what are we waiting for in a slow burn way, and what are we waiting for, and that there's still half the book left, and like literally what else could happen. But it did pick up a little bit after that, because some things did start happening. There was just a little bit lull where it was not obvious that anything was going to, and I really liked the ending in this one. And then next I read The Day of the Duchess by Sarah MacLean, which is the Road Not Taken was book 1 in the series, and The Day of the Duchess is the 3rd book in the series. I read the second one as well a couple months ago. So yeah, but I read The Day of the Duchess pretty much immediately after, because The Day of the Duchess is about Sophie's sister, Seraphina, and her husband, the Duke, that Sophie pushes into the fountain at the beginning of The Road Not Taken. So I was really intrigued as to kind of their story. Like, how did they end up where they were at this party where he gets pushed into the fountain? And so this one takes place a couple years after that book, and it's been several years, and the Duke's kind of been living in self-imposed exile out on his manor house, and Seraphina has kind of been living in self-imposed exile out of England. The Duke doesn't know where she is. He's been trying to track her down because he still loves her and wants to be married and be with her. Kind of past mistakes be damned, he still loves her, and so he's been trying to track her down. And it's just been years at this point, and she all of a sudden shows back up wanting a divorce. And so this is kind of the story of him trying to win her back, and as well as you get flashbacks to their original love story about how they got married. Originally, because when they originally got married, it was a love match. It wasn't like arranged. Like, they originally got married as a love match and then quickly fell apart to where we saw them at the beginning of book 1 in this series. So this book definitely delivers on the angst and the longing. So if you're looking for historical romance that's high angst, lots of longing and pining, this one will be great for that, especially from the Duke side, because he loves her so much and he really wants her back, so you really get the longing in that one a lot. We also see the rest of the Talbot sisters in this one, so we see Sophie from book 1, as well as one of the other sisters gets her own book called that was released last year called Bombshell, and we get to see them as kind of like they're like sidekicks together to Seraphina as like kind of like moral support, and I enjoyed them as kind of like the fun sibling sidekicks kind of trope, I guess. I thought they were fun to read about. The one thing I do wish Seraphina and Malcolm the Duke had just talked to each other just a tiny bit more. Like, this isn't just like a full, if you talked once, there'd be no book level miscommunication. I just want them to talk just a tiny bit, just like 1 or 2 more conversations, just a little bit. And then I would definitely recommend skipping the epilogue on this one because it does something that I hate, which is, oh, the heroine was infertile during the book, and that's brought up many times as a relevant plot point. Oh, well, in the epilogue, we're gonna give her not 1, but 3 miracle babies. I hate that. I hate it so much. Like, if you're gonna make a point of talking about how she's infertile as a plot point, don't give her miracle babies. Like, it just doesn't make sense. Anyways, but the book until the epilogue, it was fun. It was another fun one. Next, I read Mistakes Were Made by Meryl Wilsner. This one I am delighted to say I liked. I went into it kind of not expecting much because I didn't love this author's first book, but I was intrigued to give it another shot. I thought the premise sounded kind of interesting, so I give it a shot, and I quite enjoyed it. This follows Cassie, who is a college senior, and she ends up having a one-night stand with this other woman she meets at a bar one night off campus, and then quickly realizes later that weekend that the woman she had the one-night stand with is her best friend's mom. So I really like this one. I thought Cassie and Aaron, which I'm going to be honest, reading the main character with the same name as I was very odd. I've never done that before. I didn't love it. I'm going to be honest, I didn't love it. The first several chapters were quite weird, but you know, that's not the fault of the book. That's not the fault the book chose the same name I have. It's fine. It's fine. But, so yeah, I thought the main 2 characters were both like a really good fit for each other. They had really clear chemistry, and I just thought their personalities like worked well in tandem. And the steam in this book also was really well written, and also it's much higher steam content than I kind of assume I will get from kind of your average cartoon cover tribe published romance. So if you're looking for a sapphic romance with high steam, I would definitely recommend this one for that. The age gap and the kind of light taboo nature of the romance, and this one I think were both handled really well as far as like how they were talked about in the relationship. Like it was, both of these aspects were like acknowledged by both parties and like worked through, and I think they handled it really well. I did think the pacing was a little off though. That was kind of my main detractor. I think the main characters got together too early in the book, and I don't mean the one-night stand. Obviously, that was gonna happen at the beginning. No complaints about that. But when they actually like got together, it was too early in the book from a page count wise. I think internal timeline, it was perfectly fine, but I wish it had taken more pages mainly because the page. Then that means that the page count between when they got together and when the kind of culmination of the primary conflict that we knew was going to happen, being the best friend finding out about the relationship, it was too much page time between the two that it lost tension. And I just think if they'd gotten together farther along page-wise and there had been less time between them getting together and then the ultimate conflict kind of coming out, the tension would have been kept, and it just would have made the conflict resolution more meaningful. When I was like, I don't know, any kind of tension would have happened. By the time it happened, I was just like, yeah, I mean, I've just been waiting for this for like a while now. But overall, it was a really fun read, and I'm definitely interested now in what the author writes next, because I enjoyed this one, and hopefully, you know, debut maybe was just rough, and then she's gotten better. We'll see. We'll see which opinion, you know, holds for like her next book. Next, I read The Golden Enclaves by Naomi Novik. This is the 3rd and final book in the Skullromance series, and unfortunately, this was my least favorite of the series. Obviously, I still liked it. I gave it 4 stars, but it was definitely a little bit of a letdown after how much I just totally adored the first 2. And if I look at this book as how would I rate it as a series finisher, as far as just like the overarching series plots, I would give it a 5-star for that. I think it did a really, really great job of wrapping up all the plot lines that were left open from the first 2 books. But if I look at it just as like a book, by itself. It was more of a 4-star read just because I missed a lot of the character interactions in this one that I'd been getting in the first, especially the second one. Like, it felt like between the first and second, we like gained a lot of friend characters, and I just like missed them in this book because they just weren't around a ton, and that was a bummer. I really liked them. I really liked seeing them with Elle and kind of Elle's character journey getting there to making friends. So that was a bummer. And then there's also this new character relationship in this one that at its best moments was kind of a, well, this is kind of random, but like, sure, I guess. And then its worst moments felt very out of character, kind of depending on which scene we were in. So yeah, unfortunately, great ending to a series, but not my favorite entry into the series as just like a book. Next, I read The Younger Wife by Sally Hepworth. This is a mystery thriller about a surgeon who is wanting to get married, but he has to divorce his first wife first, but his first wife has dementia and can't really speak for herself at all. And then it also follows his 2 adult daughters who are the same age as the new wife, and so there's like that dynamic going on. And then we also get to follow the new wife, who kind of like has her secrets of her own, and it's kind of a lot of it's a very character driven kind of like unfolding of the family secrets kind of domestic thriller, I suppose you should call it, and I enjoyed it. Sally Hepworth is definitely skilled at writing books that just like are compulsively readable, and you just cannot put them down. You just have to keep finding what happens. If you like more character-driven kind of mystery thrillers, I would definitely recommend this. If you really want your plot to be high action, probably shouldn't pick this up. It's not a very high action plot. And the ending, I think, seems to be kind of divisive in the reviews I've seen, but I don't know if I liked it or not, but I found it interesting. Next, I read Siren Queen by Nghi. This is a magical realism novel set in the pre-code era Hollywood, which is late 1920s, early 1930s, kind of right as Hollywood movies transitioned out of silent movies into sound movies. And we're following Luli, we're following Luli, who is a Chinese-American girl who grew up near Hollywood and then kind of worked her way into roles, starting off just kind of lingering by movie sets and being chosen to be like an extra in a scene, kind of like how it all started off for her. And I like don't know how to talk about my feelings on this book because it was an interesting book. So I've never read a book that explained so little, but in a way that worked. Like, a lot of the, and when I say explain, I mean all of the kind of magical realism, like magic parts of it, literally not a single one was explained at all. Like, it was written as if this is the world we live in, and thus was expected you to know that, oh, sometimes they're just like monsters sometimes, and like there are some things that have magic in them, and like we talk about how this family peddles luck, but like literally kind of thing. It was really intriguing. I did think the plot got a little slow for me in the middle, which is why this wasn't like a 5-star, but I think what Nghi, I assume, set out to do with kind of this kind of, I don't know, like this magical realism Hollywood plot was really interesting, and I think she pulled it off well. It was interesting. That's kind of like I was trying to talk about it with my friend who read it kind of around the same time I did, and like I don't even know how to put my thoughts about it into words other than it was intriguing. It was really intriguing. Very beautifully written in this kind of like lyrical prose that kind of really set this kind of almost like, it really set the old Hollywood hazy vibes really well. It was interesting. It was interesting. Next, I read When We Were Bright and Beautiful by Jillian Medoff. This is a contemporary fiction book that is following this family whose youngest son is accused of and charged with rape, and then kind of just how the family's dealing with this, kind of the reveal of details about what happened, what might have happened, what the defense is saying what happened, what the prosecution is saying what happening, all through the lens of the middle child, the sister, kind of how she's seeing it all unfold within her family. And you also have these other kind of background family drama threads that are kind of weaving together as just kind of like relevant in ways you might not expect for how they're doing things in this trial. And it was interesting. It was another one that I just couldn't put it down. I just like had to know what happened, especially once we got towards the end and we actually got to the trial. Reading the trial scenes, I was like, I have to know what happens. And it was really interesting. Sometimes I didn't particularly love reading any of the family. A lot of times, a lot of their interactions came off as very combative, which just was obnoxious to read. And it made sense given the context of like the discussions they were having, but it was just not enjoyable to read sometimes, or interactions. And I didn't like the way one of the storylines ended up at the end. It kind of left me with a sour taste in my mouth leaving the book, but it was definitely an interesting read if you're down to handle, like, be able to read kind of those heavier topics. Next, I read Heartbreaker by Sarah MacLean, my third Sarah MacLean book of the month. I started this one, I was like, dang, I read a lot of MacLean this month. So this is the second book in her Hell's Bell series, sequel to Bombshell, which came out last year, and this one came out back in August, so this is her newest release. And this one follows a member of the Hell's Bells that we met in Bombshell named Adelaide, and this is another road trip romance, and so she is on the way to break up a marriage. There's this couple that is going to Gretna Green to get married kind of on the sly, so she's on her way to stop it, and she ends up being joined on this chase by the Duke, who is the older brother of the guy getting married, of the groom, and he is going to make sure it goes on because he wants his little brother to be happy. And so this kind of is, this was fun. I really like, especially because the road trip kind of started off more as like a race. Like they were on their own characters trying to beat each other because they want to be the first one to get to the couple. And I really like that. And then kind of at some point their journeys converge more into one journey. And I just like the forced proximity that road trips like this and historical romances offer for the reader. I also really liked both our main characters, and I thought the heroine was really fun. She was just she grew up in the kind of like the, what's the right word? The back alleys of London, the daughter of one of the like crime bosses, and so she was known as like the best pickpocket in town, and she kind of escaped that life, but she kind of had that personality still, and it was really fun kind of seeing kind of how her past ended up intertwining with the story. I also really liked the scene at the end that was like, let's argue our shit out right now before finally getting together, and I just liked the way they argued their problems out in that scene. Like they really talked it out and hashed it out, and I just really liked that scene. It felt like when they got together then it was really earned, and I don't know, it was fun, but I will say I don't really have many like specific criticisms of this one, but it just was missing kind of like that je ne sais quoi that like often is just the difference between 4 and 5 stars. So definitely fun, just didn't hit as a favorite for whatever reason. I am, however, very much anticipating the next book in the series because it's the couple that I had hoped would be the second book before the second book's couple was announced, and I believe it has been confirmed that they are in fact the third couple, and I'm very excited for the book. So this one only served to build my anticipation more with some of the scenes in this one. Next, I had 1 4.5 star for the month, and that was The Vicious Circle by Katherine St. John. This is another mystery thriller. I really enjoyed Katherine St. John's mystery thrillers. This is her third, and I've read all of them at this point. This follows Sveta, who unexpectedly comes into inheritance from her uncle of his wellness retreat in Mexico, and all of his assets as well. So he travels to Mexico to like see this big wellness estate, and also to pay her respects kind of at the funeral. And so while she's there, she meets his widow, who is now the leader of kind of the Xanadu cult at his wellness estate, as well as she starts to meet kind of the other cult members, and you know, things start getting fishy and suspicious, and I really liked this one. It was super gripping. I could not put it down, so I definitely had a good time with my mystery thrillers this month. And it definitely had me hooked all the way to the last page. I do think the romance drama story of this one could have been left out, as it felt a little extra, and I think that was kind of my one hang up on this one. It wasn't quite a 5-star. Like I didn't love it as much as the other 5-star I read by her, but I liked it more than her second book, which I gave 4 stars. So that's kind of how I landing on 4.5, I guess. But yeah, overall, I definitely really like this one. And if you like culty mystery thrillers, I would definitely recommend giving this one a go. Next, I have 4 5-star reads for the month. The first was Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. This is like kind of a dark fairy tale story following Mara, who is seeking help from a grave witch to help her sister, who is in a marriage with an abusive prince, who had been married to her other sister first, and then her other sister died, and now the second sister is married to her. So she's trying to help save the sister and kind of complete these tasks from the grave witch. So yeah, I really loved this book. I loved our entire band of characters. I loved every single one of them a lot, especially Bone Dog, who is a dog that is made out of reanimated bones. Adorable. I also think this kind of shorter novel was the perfect length for this story. It was a little bit longer than the novella, but not a very long novel, and I think it just worked really well for this kind of fairy tale story. It was the perfect length to kind of hit that story well. I also really liked the writing style in this one. It was kind of like a mix of macabre with like a lightheartedness sprinkled in, similar to the Hollow Places where it had some humor sprinkled in. But I think I like this one. This one definitely went, I think, harder on the macabre, and I just like that combination a lot. As well, I just thought it was a fun story as well, and I just was hooked into finding out what was going to happen. My only slight negative on this one, I just want to say, is that if you had asked me at any point during the first 90% of this book if there was a romantic storyline in it, I would have said, no, there's not. Not even like at all. Not even, I actually specifically said to my mind, I'm glad this character A and character B aren't being written as a romantic storyline, because I really like that they're just friends, and I think that's great. And then right at the end, it was like, oh no, they're like together now. And I was like, why? Like, it was weird because like at no point in the entire book to me did their relationship read romantic. So the end, them ending up together was kind of out of nowhere for me. I don't think I'm in the majority feeling that way. I feel like I've definitely seen people mention this book as far as like fantasy with good romantic subplots. I just don't think it was a good romantic subplot because it didn't come off romantic for the majority of the book. So that's just me. I still love the book despite that. It was just like a little blip at the end where I was like, interesting. Like it was better than if it had been obviously a romance the whole time that I didn't like. It just wasn't obviously a romance. Like the last scene where they were together was just like, oh, how random. So anyways, odd. Very odd now that I see people recommending this as a fantasy with a good romantic subplot, because I'm like, there was no romantic subplot. They just decided to be together at the end for no reason. Anyways, next was How to Fake It in Hollywood by Ava Wilder. This is a contemporary romance that is a fake relationship where we have this reclusive A-lister who hasn't been acting or doing anything for the past couple years, who ends up into a fake relationship set up by his PR agent with someone else, this new up-and-coming actress who is trying to kind of workshop her image just in a way to try to help her land roles that she wants. And so I loved this one so much. One, I just really like fake relationship setups, just like to start with. We're already starting well, and this also just hit other tropes that I like a lot. We had the one character forced to care for the other one due to injury/illness. We had lots of forced proximity on top of the fake relationship. I loved the chemistry between the main characters in this one. And it just felt palpable to me through the book how sizzling their chemistry was. I think the main two characters also were developed really well. It just felt so real. Like the characters themselves just felt real to me. I think Ava Wilder just did a great job with her characterization of both of them. And she really had me rooting for them, both in the relationship and in their own kind of character arc journeys that they were going through outside of the relationship, that were the kind of character arcs that I think, as they went on them, was just served to help make the relationship stronger as they kind of dealt with their own internal shit. And then I will say this book does get pretty angsty too, which I really like too. I think I really just like angst thrown in books too. Like I like lighthearted comedies, but if you can hit the angst and the romance really well, it just hits different for me. But I just wanted to mention that because some people in reviews have mentioned they thought it was just going to be a light read, and then they were really disappointed when it got kind of heavy. So like, just know it does get heavy in this book. And then, yeah, I just really liked how that turn, when the plot turned that way, how it went and how it wrapped up in the end after that. Yeah, I just love this book. It was so good. Next was a 5-star reread, and that was The Exiled Queen by Cinda Chiima. This is the second book in the Seven Realms series, and I just think this one was better in pretty much every way from the first one. It has a school setting for a lot of it, which I'm just a sucker for, especially in YA fantasy. We had two different school settings too. There was like the wizard school and the warrior school, and I liked bouncing between them kind of just to see the different environments as well. Instead of being stuck in like the one school, they're like across the river from each other. And then I just love the characters in this one, and Cinda Chiima, I think, really excels at writing teenagers that felt realistic for their age. Like it felt like they made decisions that I, as an adult, was like, well, that was a boneheaded decision, but like it made sense for a teenager to make. It wasn't just this totally stupid thing. It was like, that's a little boneheaded, but like I can see why a hormonal 16-year-old might do that kind of way. And so like as an adult, I wasn't just so distracted by how stupid they were. It was like an understandable, and I was like with the characters. It felt very on brand for them kind of deal. And the ending of this one has definitely left me aching to get to the next one, so hopefully we'll be finishing that series up soon. And then my last read for the month was Kiss Her Once For Me by Allison Cochrun. This is another Christmas romance where our main character ends up in a marriage of convenience with the landlord of her job. So he's the landlord of the coffee shop where she works. And so she ends up on the outs. She needs money. She's about to lose her apartment. And he is rich and he needs someone to marry him because he needs to be married to get some of this inheritance that his grandfather had just left him. So they end up in a marriage of convenience to help each other out. And then while they're at Christmas, that's part of the deal, is she has to go to Christmas with him for like a week at his family's cabin. And when she gets there, she discovers his sister is the girl that a year ago she spent an entire Christmas snow day with and fell in love with and then has never heard from again. And so I thought this was really well done. Allison Cochrun did a really good job of making it immediately apparent that there would be no love triangle, and I have to say shout out to her for that. Like, it was apparent from the get-go that our main character and the guy, Andrew, were not going to have romantic feelings for each other at all. So there was no true love triangle in this, and I appreciate that a lot. It allowed them to focus just on their relationship, except we also have the story of how Ellie, our main character, and Jack, the sister, met the first time, kind of weaved in, and she weaved it in non-linearly, so like it kind of jumped between different parts of the day. I actually really like that. I think she did a well job. She like weaved in the parts of the story that like made sense as a flashback in that moment, like when something in the present day would happen, referencing some part of that day, would go back to that part instead of just going to whatever the next part in kind of the chronology was. I like that a lot. I also like that Andrew, our marriage of convenience guy, had his own little romance in the background, and I was rooting for that as like a nice little background story as well. And in addition, we also see kind of Ellie, our main character, go on her own little journey of self-improvement that I think I enjoyed. And I think I also enjoyed it because kind of like in How to Fake It in Hollywood, it felt like the kind of personal journey that as she went on it was really bettering herself, but it also bettered herself to be in a better place for this relationship, which I think just helped make the relationship feel deeper and better and like it was going to be more successful, like post-book kind of deal. And I just really loved it. I really loved her and Jack together. I just thought they were just great together, and I loved seeing them trying to fight it because Jack wasn't aware of the marriage of convenience at first, and so she still had feelings but thought Ellie was actually in love with her brother, and then seeing Ellie, who like really wants to be with Jack but has this whole kind of marriage of convenience she's trying to put a facade on for. I just loved it. It was so good. So that's everything I read in October. If you've read any of these, let me know what you thought, and I will see you in my next video.